know the Gemara?
To be honest, no.
Huh?
Very confusing.
The Gemara has certain parts are more confusing, certain parts are less confusing. But yeah. What?
It's confusing.
It's confusing? The Gemara is confusing? All right.
Because I kind of forgot what I learned 2 days ago.
The only way to prevent that is to actually read it inside and read it inside again and again. You need to do it repetitively. There's something about Talmudic wisdom that is acquired from repetition. You think that if I'm repeating it, I'm just going to figure out the same exact information that I had before, and I'm going to remember it better. But it's actually not true, because there's depth within the Gemara that you need to peel away. By every time you learn the Gemara again, you peel away another set of depth, and you'd be surprised, but there is actually a lot of depth in the Gemara that you cannot find if you do not repeatedly go over and over and over and understand it. And that's also why I constantly encourage you guys that you absolutely must read it inside, because if you don't read it inside, it's almost like they're, what's a rite of passage? You know what a rite of passage is? Yes. Different clubs, they have it called the rite of passage, which means they make you do something difficult just to get into the club or just to be part of a reality. It's almost like the Gemara built a rite of passage into the brilliance of the Gemara, that you could not experience the true brilliance of the Gemara without repeatedly reading it over and over and over. You will not understand it, or you will not understand the brilliance. Even if you think you understand it, you did not understand it at the true ultimate level that you could have understood it had you read it over and over a few times, you in the words of the Gemara. All right? Yeah. 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 Good. Okay. I'm going to continue. We basically are trying, we're in middle of a discussion where the Gemara is trying to figure out, is putting something next to Akira the same as putting it on top of Akira? In other words, if you were prohibited from putting it on top of the Kira without it being Grufa Uktuma, right? Would that prohibition extend to putting it next to the Kira? Or would that prohibition not extend to putting it next to the Kira? In other words, you could put it next to the Kira. We brought two separate tashmas to try and resolve this issue. And unfortunately, or fortunately, because the Gemara gets more fun when we do this, but the Gemara rejected the proofs of the tashma. And now the Gemara says, Mai have Allah, which literally means what is on it. What is on it? What is on it? Or what is of it, really? My have Allah is actually, I'm not sure if I put it there as a keyword. Did I put it there as a keyword on your sheets over there? What? No. What page are we on?
52.
In the Gemara, we're Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph 37:8. 4 lines from the bottom. In the your sheets, what number on the sheets 51. Are we? My Havi Allah?
51, 52, I think.
Yeah.
Rabbi, you don't want me to record this on Facebook?
You could. First of all, it's already recorded on my Facebook. But if you want to also record it on your Facebook, you're welcome. Okay. Right, but you have to realize just that you got the guy nervous when you bend the computer, because then it ruins this one. We have to do it. We can add. We don't subtract. Also, we can add influence, but we cannot remove influence.
And it's very distracting when it keeps on blinking back to your screen to the camera instead of not working screen. So I'm trying to focus on my point down across. I don't need to elaborate.
What's the problem?
The problem is that you are not being more.
Huh?
No. I'm sorry for being disrespectful. I'm not really sorry.
He's getting fire.
Anyways,
My
Havi Allah really should be a keyword. It is a constant, it is a very common set of words. And My Havi Allah means essentially how do we resolve this matter? Now, sometimes the Gemara uses this terminology, and I'm not exactly sure why, because we could have just gone straight to the next Tashma.
Yeah.
Because the previous Tashma we debunked, we said it is invalid, and therefore, why not go to the next Tashma? Right? Instead, it says, "My Haveyola," what is on it? It does use this terminology to basically, it's basically the Gemara confirming that it's not yet resolved, and how are you going to resolve it? So now we have a third Tashma for this particular query. Tashma, come and listen.
Functionally, it just indicates that.
It indicates that we haven't resolved an issue at hand. That's what it indicates. And we're basically saying what is on it, meaning how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to resolve this issue? Right?
There's like several times the Tashma's been brought up already.
Correct.
It's really clear, I guess.
What?
So they're very.
You think that the Talmudic masters were confused? They were trying to. By the way, Yosef over here just said something that is actually very important, and I think is important. The fact that he said it shows that the class needs to understand this reality of Gemara. The rabbis were not necessarily confused. Okay, the rabbis were actually trying to record all the possible evidence and all the possible ways of thinking in order to ensure that somebody doesn't make a mistake with these challenges. For example, you have to understand that the Talmud was written at a time where it not necessarily knew that it would have been accepted as authority. Today, no one's going to argue with the Talmud. But guess what? For 50, 100 years after the Talmud was written, people may have argued with the Talmud. And what would happen is what would happen if the Talmud didn't include one of these Tashmas? Some rabbi 20 years after the Talmud would come up and say, hey, I got a great Tashma that could have resolved your issue, and therefore try to retract and take apart all of the conclusions of the Gemara because he came up with some type of a proof that he felt was legitimate. And therefore, the Gemara deliberately brings whatever it feels is a legitimate argument and takes it apart so that no one in the future should make the mistake of thinking that it's a legitimate argument. Wow. Okay, you have to realize that this was part of the intention of recording these arguments. Right? It wasn't oh my gosh, the rabbis couldn't figure it out, so they bought one tashma, two tashma, and then after 10 tashmas, they finally got the answer. So why do you have to bring all 9 tashmas? Let's just bring the last one and that's it. Right? The answer is they wanted each of these tashmas because they were afraid that if they only brought the 10th tashma, let's say the 10th tashma includes B, and 7, 6, and 5 were proving A, right? Now, if it didn't mention those tashmas and their rejection, right, somebody later would have said, oh, I found a tashma that they didn't mention, and this seems to prove the opposite, so let's undo their conclusion because I just proved them otherwise. So the Gemara actually deliberately recorded every single possible legitimate argument against their conclusions in order to say, hey, we thought of this, guys. Don't think that we didn't think of this. We actually did think of this, and we rejected it deliberately. They're trying to upslug any other possibility, yeah. Essentially, yeah. Yeah. By the way, if those of you who have done some smicha, especially we have Moshe Chaim Leib, who's in our rabbinic ordination program over here, you will know, people ask me, you have these books that the shach that is a whole page long takes you half an hour, 45 minutes to learn. The book will tell you what it means, what the shach is trying to say in 2 lines. So they ask me, why does a shach write 10 lines or 20 lines, 30 lines when you could easily write it in 2 lines? Right? And the answer is that the shach, when he wrote his book, he didn't know that people are going to accept him as an authority. He had no clue. He had no clue people would accept him as the shach, and therefore they would accept his halachic ruling, right? Because he wrote a book called Sifsei Kohen, and therefore all of a sudden people are going to listen to him. No, they didn't know that.
Was it Kohen?
I would assume he's a Kohen if he wrote a book called Sifsei Kohen. I don't know offhand, but I would assume he was a Kohen. Sifsei Kohen literally means the words of the Kohen. So I'm assuming that a guy would not write a book, say the words of the Kohen if he wasn't a Kohen. So Subi is a kohen.
Oh.
Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the Shach did not know that he was going to be accepted as a halachic authority when he wrote his book. So therefore, he wrote his book to people who did not even know him yet, who did not accept him as a Torah authority yet. And therefore, he was arguing his points. Now, through the fact that he argued his points, that is actually why people accept it. They're like, yeah, listen, he's making a good point. 1, 2, 3, boom, I can't argue with his points. And therefore, they're like, he must be brilliant because he has great points. And that's actually what gave him his authority. Right? And today, we're like, okay, what's the Shach hold? Was a Taz hold. But it's important to read the whole Shach and the whole Taz so you understand how they brought it out. And by the way, it's also important because what happens if you come with an argument to suggest that he's wrong, right? Well, if he already addressed your argument, then you can't. What do you mean? He addressed your argument. He showed you why you can't have your argument. And the Gemara essentially was written similarly to that concept, where it is trying to mention, and again, it might look like, some Gemara teachers, some Talmudic teachers erroneously try to teach the Gemara as if the Gemara was confused and the Gemara didn't know. It's actually a tremendous fault or gap in their true understanding of the Talmudic wisdom. Okay, everything here was for a purpose. Everything here was for a reason. If they ask a question and give an answer, because they wanted you to know that there is a possibility to ask this question, right? And this is the answer to that question. Now, if they didn't write that and they just came to a conclusion, maybe some rabbi will say, you must have not thought about this question. So the Gemara says, no, we thought of this question and we put it in there and we put the answer, right? And by the way, if a rabbi would come and somehow undo the answer of the Gemara, then maybe he would know, okay, well, now I could argue with the Gemara. Because if the Gemara thought of this and it's a legitimate argument, they should have put it in there, right? So essentially, the Gemara tried to include all legitimate arguments, right? And their refutation as well, if they had a refute, and if not, then they became the halacha, they became the final law. Yeah? What? In the Gemara? I cannot think of offhand where a Rishon or a later person literally overthrew the Gemara. I don't think so. Think about it the other way around. The Gemara, it very often overthrows the Mishnah. Right? Again, even though the Amaraic sages did not have authority over the Tanaic sages, however, they very often had Tanaic opinions that were not including in the Mishnah called Brises Toseftas. Now, sometimes the rabbis of the Gemara, they would actually use their own logic to determine that one of the Tanaic sages that were not including in the Mishnah is the actual final halacha. Right? And by the way, the Mishnah didn't include a lot of its reasonings. So the Gemara can guess what their reasoning was, and very often guessing their reasonings, they can choose between one Tana and the other and figure out who the halacha should be like. So right? And that is in the time of the Gemara. After the Gemara, I cannot think of a case. I might be wrong. And if anybody wants to put in the comments, etc., I'd be happy to hear you, etc. All right?
Rabbi, if the halacha is already found in the Gemara, then how come the Rambam go with a different opinion and Shulchan Aruch go with a different opinion?
So the Gemara, even though the Gemara tries to conclude the halacha, but it's a little bit vague, the Gemara deliberately perhaps did not always say this is the final halacha. And therefore, after the Gemara was written, there are various different rabbis that analyze the Gemara to determine what is and what isn't the halacha. And there's a lot of arguments in the Rishonim amongst each other how to determine from the Gemara what the halacha is. So the Rambam's not arguing with the Gemara. The Rambam might be arguing with the Rif or the Rosh or the Mordechai, the Rashba, or any of the Rishonim. He might be arguing with them as to how to determine what the final halacha is from the Gemara. Yeah? Yeah, you understood?
I understand 100%, yeah.
Good. Shkoyach. Thanks for painting nice pictures of me. I saw yesterday you had a picture of me. Can I know it? Yeah.
Why
why do we have this issue by the Gemara but not by the writing of the Mishnah? I mean, what is the difference?
Well, the Mishnah essentially, the Mishnah essentially tried to write the law in the shortest possible way it felt it could. Okay, that's what the way the Mishnah did it. The Gemara deliberately tried to put in the arguments and the reasoning and the logic behind it, and that's why the Gemara is very different than the Mishnah.
Meaning
Yeah.
So when people's notes were compiled,
Yeah.
the notes themselves were not written as the way the Mishnah is written. The notes were then condensed.
I don't know what notes are you talking about. You're talking about the Bryce and the Tosefta? Meaning
They
that
compiled the Mishnah.
there was one man that compiled the Mishnah, at least one man in charge of it, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi compiled the Mishnah. He didn't necessarily include every single Tanaic teaching that he had. He picked and chose which ones he felt were meant to be said. And very often, by the way, very often in a brisa, there includes some type of reason. And in the Mishnah, it doesn't include the reason because he didn't want to include the reason. So he purposely left out information that was available to him. He didn't write all the information that was available to him. He wrote the information that was available to him that he felt was applicable to determine what the halacha is and what the halacha isn't.
Meaning when they were taught the halacha, were they taught it as it was written in the Mishnah?
Who? Was who taught?
No, the sages before the Mishnah.
When Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi compiles the Mishnah,
Yeah.
doesn't he like ask everyone for their notes?
Whatever he had available, he knew what he knew whatever information was available about the Tanaic teachings he had. Of those teachings, he chose what he felt needed to be in the Mishnah, what he felt didn't need to be in the Mishnah. However, many of these notes from the Tanaic sages were passed down from the time of the Mishnah later for later generations, and these notes very often are included in the Gemara sometimes to overthrow the Mishnah's opinion. Yeah. Anyways, this is I think is a very important talk for this particular class because this is the Talmudic literacy program. It's very important to understand some of the basics of the Talmud as we discussed today. So whoever thought we wasted time, wrong. We actually didn't. This is actually a very important information for anybody wanting to study the Talmud.
You have a good comment.
Yeah, Motion Jen, who's that? Mosin. They think I'm adorable. Shkoyach, thank you. I can't say I think you're adorable because I don't even see a picture here, so I can't even say. No picture. I can't. Right? It would be a lie to say you're adorable if I don't know how you look, right? Who knows? Maybe the person has like this, completely ugly. I could be. I don't know. It could be. I have no idea. I don't know. I never saw them, right? I would say you're then like telling. No, sometimes if you tell them you're adorable, that'll be an offense, right? I mean, if somebody knows that they're completely messed up and you say they're adorable, that's like an offense, right? So I have to know how they look. Then I could, even if I don't think they're adorable after seeing how they look, I can know whether it's offense or not, right? You understand?
Beauty is within, Rabbi.
Huh? Beauty is within. Well, that I definitely don't see. I don't see what's within. I usually see what's without. Yeah. Or what's outside there. Yeah. Anyways. All right. Beyond. Good. Thank you. Yeah, let's continue. Okay. So we basically got stuck right in the beginning. We didn't learn a word of Gemara yet. And it's, 25 minutes into the class. We learned a lot of important philosophical concepts and how to see the Gemara. Let's actually go to the Gemara itself. How do we resolve this issue? Remember, we're dealing with is putting something on the side of the kira the same rule as putting it on top of the kira. Yeah, Toshma, come and listen. Kira sheshikuah guess was the eitzim. A kira that was heated with gefes and eitzim, which means with this pulp and with wood, seimchin law, you're allowed to put it next to it, ve'ein mikaimin, and you're not allowed to put on top of it, elain kan gruva tuktuma. This seems exactly 100% proven that you're allowed to put it next to a kira, but you're not allowed to put it on top of a kira, which seems to be evidence of resolving our issue. Gechomim she'amamu, Gechol chamim that whispered, or you put a blanket of flax on it. Daka thin black. It is like ketuma. So basically, we brought a brisa that seems very clearly to say that you are not allowed to put it on top and you are allowed to put it on the side. And this actually seems to be the resolution of the Gemara, because the Gemara doesn't go on after this, even though it doesn't explain that and it doesn't say it clearly. But it seems from the logic of the Gemara that the Gemara concludes that you could actually put on the side of a kira. You're not allowed to put it on top of the kira unless it's grufa ktuma. It also throws in that whispering coals. What's whispering coals? Whispering coals means that it's kind of like, it's almost dead. If you ever know the barbecue, you have it's like, yeah, it is a little, it makes a little bit of a noise, but it doesn't really have much heat. The oidis is basically, if you know, flax is like it's like a hairy type of thing, and you basically put a thin blanket of flax, meaning non-processed flax. You put it over there, yeah. Yeah, so that's considered ketuma, which means you don't actually have to spread ashes on it. You could put a little blanket of flax, and that's considered ketuma. As well as if the coals are whispering. In other words, the coals are kind of like out. There might be a little bit of power left to them, but not a lot of power to them. And since there's only a little bit of power, we're not afraid that you're going to stir the coals, because you're stirring the coals is not going to do much because it's already dead. Yeah. Huh? Who said anything? I don't see how you proved it wrong. I would love to hear how you came to that conclusion. On the contrary, maybe whispering coals doesn't really add heat. First, let me ask you something. If you cover the coals, does it add heat? You would assume so. So Rashi, why is Rashi saying it doesn't? Obviously, he's saying it's not enough heat to add heat to the pot. We're not saying that there's no heat. It would make no sense for Rashi to say that, the second you sprinkle some ashes on the coals, all of a sudden there's no heat. There is heat. There's not enough heat to add heat to the pot that's on top of the kira. Could be the same thing here. There's no reason. I don't see a reason to differentiate between 1 and 2, and that's that. Yeah, good. Yeah, we understood? Yes. A lot of new words. Yes, correct. Which one? Gecholim is coals. She'amamu is kind of like, whispered. Yeah. Oishen nasan, or if you place aleha on it, niyodes. Niyodes is like I guess a thin blanket or shalpishtan of flax. Niyodes is not really a blanket. It's almost like a
Layer, yeah.
like maybe a thin layer of flax.
Or it is means that whole concept, layer of flax.
Again, the word niyodes is a bit of a unique word. And I think that we might need to look it up better to understand what exactly it means. But it means like a thin layer of flax altogether. It could mean like the hairs of flax. I'm not sure. I want to look it up before I tell you 100%. Don't want to confuse you too much. A little bit I don't mind, but too much, forget it. That's not good. Huh? What's that?
Flax. Oh, pishtan is flax.
Pishtan is flax, correct. Thick, thin. Daka is thin. Yeah. Daka. We are at the second to bottom of the line, Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. Actually, yeah, second to last line. All right. Now, as I said, the Gemara is going on to something else. I want to remind you, just so you understand the flow of the Gemara. The beginning of the Gemara, we started with the Boilahu. We started saying, is it Layachser Tanan or Laylishes Tanan? We had 3 Tashmas to try to prove it. We failed. Neither of the Tashmas proved it. We seemingly gave up and went on to another issue, which is the side, the same as the top. And we basically seem to conclude the side is not like the top. And now we're going to go on to another discussion. Okay. And again, we still didn't resolve the first issue, and we might deal with it a little bit later on the next page. Not we might, we will. I just don't want to give you too much of a spoiler alert, because that's already next week. But let's, as I said, it's Tuesday, and I would like to finish today the Gemara at least the first time. Tomorrow, hopefully, we're going to go through it briefly in detail, right? Meaning to see the whole picture. And Wednesday, we might have a little time to review and for you guys to read it a million extra times, because the more times you read it, the better you're going to know it. And then we're going to do a test. We're going to see how well you read it inside without your paper over here. Okay, I want to remind you guys, every single person that joined this class got warned and reminded and instilled into his brains that the most important part of this class is after you finish taking your notes and you feel that you actually know the Gemara in your notes, you need to open the actual Gemara and read in the Gemara without your notes, because that's actually what's going to help your mind get used to reading the Gemara without your notes. It's very important. And as I told you, from experience, I can tell you the difference is if you do that last exercise, you should be able to learn how to know the Gemara within 6 to 8 months. And again, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. Again, 2 months is Gemara, 2 months Gemara, Rashi, 2 months Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. This program should get you to know how to learn Gemara on your own within 6 months, Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. Gemara itself is about 2 months. Within 2 months, you should be able to know it pretty good. And of course, you're going to develop your skills as well. That is only if you do that third. If you do not do that third exercise, if you just rely on your notes, it's going to take you probably closer to 2 to 3 years. Wow. And you're like, what's the difference? That's the difference. Because I'm telling you from experience, I'm watching the guys that did the third exercise versus the guys that didn't do the third exercise, and that one little exercise, which you like, what do you mean? I worked on my notes already. What's the big deal if I read it inside without my notes or not? I'm telling you, it's a massive deal, and it's going to make the difference between 6 months to 3 years. Yes, and make sure to learn it inside, read it inside as much as you could. And again, I want you to read it inside the Gemara until you're able to read it without your notes. So read it, if you need to read it 2, 3, meaning, again, the first time you read it, you might have to go back and forth to your notes, right? Well, then read it a second time. So the first time you went to your notes 10 times. The second time you read it, you went to your note 5 times. And then the third time you read it, you went to your note 2 times. The fourth time you read it, you went to your notes 0 times. Now you know it. And again, if you do that by the end of the week, and with each Gemara, you're able to read it without your notes by the end of the week, then it's about a 6-month program, etc., to get this into your head. But again, don't rely just on the program. Try your best to remember it. Don't just say, Rabbi, I'm just going to sit there and listen and follow you. No, you're here to learn it. You want to learn and understand. All right, so I'm going to read the last small part of this week's quota. And and that's that. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani says, Omar Rabbi Yeshaya, he says in the name of Yeshaya. Okay, he's an Amoraic sage, one of the earlier Amoraic sages, but he is an Amoraic sage. Kotma vehu v'hara. What happens if you sprinkled salt on those coals in order to dim their heat so that you could put something on top on Shabbos, but you came 2 minutes later and it fired back up again? It was now back on fire as if you never did that concept. Yeah? Kotma vehu v'aro. Kotma means you sprinkled it with ash, vehu v'aro, and then it kind of fired back up. I want to tell you, how many guys over here were ever in Gan Yisrael, Montreal? No? Parksville's way better. I'll tell you what, I think Montreal's way better. You know why? Because I was never in Parksville. And you know why you think Parksville's better? You were never in Montreal? My brothers were actually in Parksville. I, for some reason, never made it to Parksville as a camper. I went there for visiting day. I've been to the property, but I've never actually went there for camp. What? No. I made a mistake. Maybe I did. I don't know, mistake or not. One time I sent my daughter to Camp Emunah from Israel to America, and she liked it so much she wanted to stay in America for school, and it cost me close to $100,000.
What?
Yeah, just sending her one time. I sent her one time to Camp Amuna. Cost me $100,000.
Must be so rich, probably.
I'm still trying to figure out how to pay for it. I didn't say I paid $100,000. I said it cost me $100,000. Yeah, see, Camp Amuna is expensive. You understand the 1 year? Camp Amuna is a girls' camp in New York. It's actually, I think, the original Chabad girls' camp. I don't chas v'sholom. They're actually a great camp. I mean, they're such a good camp that my daughter's like, oh wow, I made so many friends. I want to stay in America for high school. So I had to pay for 4 years of American high school, and now seminary too. By the way, this is a plea to anybody. I have to pay my daughter's seminary itself is $20,000. I have no clue how I'm paying for it. No clue whatsoever. Right. I managed to find a sponsor for $3,000 to give the deposit, so I'm already in because I paid a deposit $3,000. Now I need to find another $17,000. I have no clue where it's coming from. I'm sure Hashem will send it to me somehow or another, but I don't know how, when, and where it's coming yet. If any of you guys know where Hashem is going to send me $17,000, huh? How did what happen? Who? Yeah, because they said, yeah, we'll accept your daughter if you give us $3,000 deposit. Somebody else sponsored the $3,000, and so she's accepted. Now I have to figure out how to pay the other $17,000. Anyways, can I know how to? Baruch Hashem. Huh? Oh, that's right. I got completely sidetracked. No. Oh, I was speaking of Guy from Montreal. I don't know if they still do it. When I was there as a camper, they actually, one of the prizes, if your bunk was behaved and they did what they were supposed to do, they would have what's called a cookout. A cookout basically meant that your counselor took you into some area over there, some forest, whatever it is. All the kids went to the forest and gathered a bunch of wood. We built a big bonfire, and we got. And instead of having to eat the regular dinner, they would give us hot dogs, and we would put it on the stick, and we'd put the hot dog on top of the fire until it cooks. Right? You remember? You ever did that? Right? The stick in the hot dog right in the middle. Right? And you hold the hot dog over the fire, and then you eat the hot dog, and then the kids are so excited that they eat a burnt hot dog that they cooked. Somehow it tastes better because they did it. Doesn't, huh? Spores? Oh, marshmallows. Yeah, marshmallows. We got the marshmallows also. Yeah, marshmallows. Whatever they would give it, whatever the counselor, they would give the counselor a couple of stuff. And anyways, the reason I'm saying this is because we went to a cookout. And when we finished the cookout, so of course the rule is you have to put out the fire. So we put out the fire, right? We didn't have much water, so took a bunch of sand, put it on top of the fire, put out the fire. We thought the fire was out, no more fire. We started walking away, and we're maybe 200-300 feet away, and my counselor turns around and he's like, I see a fire. No one else was supposed to be there. It must have been on fire. We go back. That fire was as burning as if nothing happened. I'm telling you, like if we didn't come back, that's it. It would have burned the whole forest down. Thank God we noticed it. We came back. We had to put it out a second time. Right? So the reason I'm sharing this story is because in our Gemara, we're saying what happens if you sprinkle the ashes on top of it. You thought you weakened the fire enough. Turns out you failed. You failed. You come back 10 minutes later and there's a big fire on it. Yeah. So what's the rule? Does it return to its original status or not? Right? Where do you see the word salt? Huh? I didn't say the word salt. You're hearing things. Huh? Not maybe. Definitely. I don't think I said the word salt. Huh? Did anybody hear the word salt? You heard the word salt? He heard the word salt. Okay. I don't know what you're talking about. No, if you sprinkle ashes. He heard salt. Okay. Maybe I did say salt. It could be. Right? We're on a recording over here. You can go back and you can go back. Right? By the way, we're live on Facebook, YouTube, Kick, Twitch, and X. All together. Yeah. Huh? Do I get any money from who? No, they never gave me a penny, these guys. Not yet. Not yet. What? I could try to you on your streams. Anyways, let's go back to what we're saying again. So let's read. Rabbi Yeshaya says, Kotma v'huvara, if you did the ketuma and it lit back up, mashin olel chamin, you're allowed to leave chamin, hot water on it, sheuchamu kol tzarkan, if the hot water was fully heated. V'tavshil shabishul kol tzarkai, and you're allowed to leave on it a food that was fully cooked. Now this sounds a little different. I was sleeping in my class. Good morning. All right, it's the morning already. Bright, shine. What do you say? Bright and shine. Rise and shine. Rise. You know, you have your hands on the table. It doesn't work, you know. Anyways, interestingly enough, we have a new title or a new concept that we did not yet mention. Here, for the first time, we mentioned the concept fully heated or fully cooked. Hananya says partially cooked. He says, Michael ben Droisoi. Here we see fully cooked. Now, what could we learn from the fact that he says, if it was fully cooked or if it was fully boiled, he says you're allowed to leave it on a kira that was originally sprinkled and then lit back up. So the Gemara says, Shmami no, it seems to be from here, mitstamek v'yafalei muter, that if it congeals and gets better, it is muter. And here's another concept that we're going to be discussing in the next few weeks in this Gemara, whether food that gets better as it cooks, whether it's permitted to put on a kira on Shabbos. Yeah? Now, obviously, food that is Michael ben Soy, which is either a half-cooked or a third-cooked, we are allowed to do something with it, according to Hananya, right? Now, is Rabbi Yeshaya arguing with Hananya? Or perhaps he's not arguing with Hananya, and he's telling us something new? Yeah. What's that? Correct. Ben Soy for sure gets better. That's what I'm trying to say. Ben Soy for sure gets better because it's partially cooked. Till it gets fully cooked, it definitely gets better. The only question is, once it's fully cooked, is it going to get better or not? Now, you have to realize the Gemara over here, when it suggests that this must be what Rabbi Yeshaya is teaching, it's trying to suggest that we're assuming that this kira is not fired up. It's not ketumad. Meaning, if you sprinkle the ashes and then it lights back up, it would seem like we're trying to suggest that it returns to its original status of not being ketumad. Right? Now, if it returned to its original status of not being ketumad, right? Put it this way, if it was ketumad, we should be allowed to leave anything on it, right? Even if it's Michael ben Risoy. And even if the Mishnah is Lisoy, seemingly we should be allowed to do it. Meaning, according to all the categories in the Mishnah, even Lisoy, if it was katmad, if it was sprinkled, it should be allowed, right? According to Beis Shammai, but we don't paskin like Beis Shammai. We paskin like Beis Hillel. We automatically assume we automatically assume that Allah is like Beis Hillel. Yeah, 100%. And since he's only allowing you if it's fully cooked, it seems to be that he's suggesting that it's fired back up, and that this seems to also be lishes tanan. Yeah, it seems to be because he says mashi. Yeah. So the Gemara says that it seems to be that he's arguing that mitztamik v'yafaloi is mutter because it's fully cooked. And he says, well, because it's fully cooked, you're allowed to leave it on even though it was not ketumah, even though it really was ketumah, because it fired back, it's no longer considered to ketumah. He's basically saying that if it's fully cooked, you could leave it on even if it's not ketumah. Right? But the fact that he's allowing you to leave it on fully ketumah, when it's not fully ketumah, it seems to be that his reasoning is that even if it gets better, it's mutter. Right? Huh? Again, he says as long as it's fully cooked, you have no problems. But hold on a second. What's if it gets better? Again, certain foods get worse the longer they cook. Certain foods get better the longer they cook. Right? Now, because he seems that fully cooked is one rule, right? One rule, blanket rule for everything. Yeah. So he seems to me that he doesn't differentiate between getting better and not getting better. Yeah. If he's talking about correct. The fact it says fully cooked. Again, he sees fully cooked as one category. He doesn't see fully cooked as two categories. Okay, if he would have an issue with it getting better, then he would have two categories of fully cooked. He would have fully cooked getting better, fully cooked that doesn't get better. The fact that he lumps it up into one category shows that he doesn't think that there's differences in the category. Right? Gut verstanden? Very good. So that's what the Gemara tries to argue. So the Gemara says, Shani hacha de katma. He says, no, this is different because he did ketuma. That's the only reason he's allowing you, even though it gets better, because you did ketuma, he's allowing it. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, what is he trying to say? So the Gemara says, we need it for the fact that it fired back up. Mao the tamer, you might have thought, even the huvara, once it fires back up, that it goes back to its original status. Kamash malon is not. That's not. And that's really the end of this week's Gemara, which I think we probably should have ended before, but no, that's what it is. It is what it is. Good. Any questions? I think we're gonna end the shir, at least the Gemara part, on that. We're gonna go to questions. And by the way, if anybody online, you guys, if you have questions, you can put it in the comments, and we see it real time, and we might answer it. Again, the Gemara originally assumed that by firing up, it now returned to its original status. The Gemara's answer is no. That's not what it's trying to say. It's actually trying to say the exact opposite. It's trying to say that it remains its status even if it fires back up. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. Really? Yeah. Because if we're going to say that it returns to its original status, so that would seem to prove that he holds that all fully cooked foods are the same category, whether they get better or not get better. So the Gemara tried to use that to prove that this is what this statement is indicating. And then the Gemara's answer is no, it could possibly be indicating otherwise.
Well, based on that premise, it would seem that ketuma is not inside the fire, but inside a symbol, a simon, to prevent the guy from stoking the flame.
Oh, listen to this brilliant Jew. This is a brilliant Jew. You ever met a brilliant Jew before? Since when are Jews smart? Jews are smart? The only thing we're allowed to do is learn? Who said that? Huh? Doesn't mean that's the only thing you're allowed to do. We're allowed to do other things. Yeah. Anyways, it's a good question. It seems to be from Rabbi Yeshaya that Rabbi Yeshaya doesn't necessarily go with Rashi's thing that ketuma is for heat, because obviously if it's fired back up, it will add heat. That's a good question. It's a good question. You see, you have a job, Yosef Rothschild. You know what your job is? Your job is to figure out how to learn the Gemara quickly, because you need to be in the advanced class already. Intellectually, definitely. You just need to get used to the reading, and I think some of the other guys too. But I'm saying from your questions, you would definitely appreciate more going into some of the Mefarshim who would discuss this. It's a good question. It's a great question. It's something that I think that maybe the Mefarshim would discuss. Yeah. So it's very interesting, and now you're starting to see how Rabbi Yeshaya, I mean, he's obviously not arguing with Rabbi Chanina, right? He maybe holds the Mishnah. First of all, he could hold that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda from last page. Could be. Right? He could also hold that the Mishnah is actually Rabbi Chanina, but he holds like Rabbi Yehuda anyways. And Amoira very often sided differently with the Tanoim, meaning he could side with a Tana contrary to the Mishnah. So it seems to be that he's definitely not siding with Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina, at least from before Shabbos.
How do you know there's a third category?
Huh?
Why couldn't there be potentially a third category if you did Ketuma?
Again, what the Gemara is saying is that if you do ketuma, Rabbi Yeshaya says if you do ketuma, you could leave something on the fire that's fully cooked, which means you cannot leave something that's partially cooked. Now, if you can't leave something that's partially cooked, that would be contrary to what Rabbi Chanina says. So that itself seems to be contradicting Rabbi Chanina. Now the question is, how could he contradict Rabbi Chanina? Well, as I said.
Maybe there's a third, potentially, why couldn't there be a third category? He holds that since he already did the group of, we're not concerned about putting something that's, you can't put something that's not fully cooked.
So you're basically saying that you're basically suggesting that the fact that it fired back up does change the matter. Although the Gemara seems to conclude otherwise. So you have a problem that you want to argue with the Gemara. And I personally don't argue with the Gemara. And if you want to argue with the Gemara, you're welcome. But I'm not going to accept such an argument. Again, I see what you say. It seems to be what you're saying seems to be correct. That it could be that he's saying that if it fires back up, it's not quite as bad as if you never did it, but it's not as good as if you did it. And therefore you could leave fully cooked, but you can't leave partially cooked. Yeah. So it's a perfectly good argument, although the Gemara seems to conclude otherwise. Now the question is, why does the Gemara conclude otherwise? Why doesn't it conclude the way you said? What you would say would be a perfectly legitimate argument. And the question is, why didn't the Gemara make that argument? Yeah. Good. I want everybody to take your Gemaras and learn and read through as much as you could. And I will ask, I started doing this, I think it's very good to ask one or two people to come read together with me today. I think today, who didn't do it for a while? Huh? Yeah. 12:30, B'ezrat Hashem. Again, yeah, I guess Yaakov and Yosef. Yaakov and Yosef. Well, you did? Yeah. Yosef, how about that? We'll come read together with me. Yeah, we'll learn a little bit together. All right. I don't see any questions from our crowd online, so we will shut down in about 10 seconds if we don't have any other questions. You have to realize that there's about a 7-second delay on this, so the second you hear this, you better type quick, because otherwise you'd miss it. All right. Yeah, 10, 9, 8, 7. Why are you counting so fast?
3, 2, 1.
Yeah. A gute Nacht. Sei gesund. All the best.